Glad you're along tonight. We're going to take a look at some very serious issues this evening. As we do many times, we don't tell you what to think. We just ask you to engage in the process and come up with your own determinations and views and share them as you will and as you can. Thanks to a very few people, Dane Wigington at the top of the list, we know about chemtrails. The photographs, the videos, the eyewitness reports, the sampling, air samples, ground samples, water samples, the illnesses involved. This is all geoengineering. It's not a surprise. And if you click on Dane Wigington's name in guests at Rense.com, you'll go to the website, which has so much hardcore data. It's really remarkable. It's called geoengineeringwatch.org. I was a doubter in the beginning, but my doubts evaporated one day. I've told the story. I won't tell it again, but some of these pictures are amazing. And I do remember also in the middle of summer, it was a very hot July, perhaps August, no weather systems moving through at all in the Northwest. And there were several days the skies were just obscenely covered with these trails. Not contrails, low, high. They just plastered the skies. Of course, they've refined their techniques over the years. Now they're spraying offshore at night or early in the morning and letting the weather systems bring this stuff along with them and move it across the country. So they're real. They are messing with the atmosphere. They have been putting perhaps nano-sized particulates now of aluminum, barium, and other items into the lower atmosphere. I mean, 20,000 feet and below, maybe even up to 30,000. To turn the lower atmosphere, we think, into a number of different platforms for doing a number of different things. It's a very nefarious, evil, and ugly practice. It's called geoengineering, otherwise known as chemtrails, and Dane Wigington is back with us tonight to talk about that. I might also add, in addition to all the crap they're putting up there intentionally, in nano-sized particulates, I'm sure. That's a guess, but it's a good one. We also now have to concentrate on the fact that since the 1950s, the above-ground atomic tests still have radionuclides floating around in the atmosphere above our heads. And now with Fukushima, things are getting worse. We've seen the counts per minute on handheld Geiger counters in airplanes three times now. I put them up on Rense for you, showing people at 20, 30,000 feet coming down for landings in Portland, Oregon, for example, and watching the CPM inside the plane go up to as much as 1,200 counts per minute, which is unbelievable. Anyway, enough of that. Welcome back, Dane Wigington. How are you?
Good, Jeff. Thanks. Thanks for helping us address this issue again, and it's unfolding quickly and ramping up quickly. We're hearing from people across the country and across the globe that even in recent weeks we're seeing more and hearing more about very, very extensive coverage of the spraying, more than we've ever seen before.
Mm-hmm. Mainstream media talk, you mean?
Well, no. This is from reports on the ground. People who have been monitoring for us, and the coverage really appears to be going to new levels, and we think there's very specific issues connected to that. We've talked in the past about the methane expulsion happening in the Arctic and the Laptev Sea in particular,
mm-hmm.
and we're getting updates on that almost by the day, and the images on the satellite now are alarming as hell with what's happening there, and it appears that this is the geoengineering response, that as the climate is forced in one direction because of the feedback loops that have been triggered, the geoengineers try to force it back. And so we see these, and they're forced back, they're pushed back with stratospheric aerosol geoengineering does horrific damage to the system as a whole. So it's not like it's in any sense benign. And the climate system is really, truly starting to unravel, and that's why we're seeing these massive, massive temperature fluctuations in extremely short periods of time.
And very odd storm seasons, very late tornado season. These typhoons in Asia, Southeast Asia, enormous. The one that hit the Philippines, the biggest they say ever in history. We also have a number of things to talk about tonight, and I don't want to leave people just thinking that it's just chemtrails. That they have turned this planet's atmosphere into a mess, and it's not going to just go away in a few weeks, a few months. It's a very serious crisis, and it's only continuing. And as I mentioned before, now we have to wonder about the radiation up there, and who's going to measure that for us? Not the EPA. They don't measure anything. They don't do anything except what they're told. So it's going to be up to a number of citizens, as many as have Geiger counters and as many as live along the West Coast, for example. In the next 3 to 6 months, are going to ask you to write to us with your measurements and your readings of air, water samples, and anything you care to measure, and let us know what's happening. If we don't do it, no one else is going to do it for us. And people who have helped and worked with Dane over the years and others to report chemtrails and make their reality known deserve so much credit. It just, you can't quantify it. And I as I'm watching your website, Dane, watching these pictures go by, it just makes me sick. The liberation of methane hydrates from the seafloor of the Arctic, which is coming up now, and it's a gas. Is this, in your view, or do you have any data to suggest this is an intentional thing? Are they trying to liberate methane hydrate, or is this just a byproduct of warming?
No, in fact, I believe all available data indicates the power structure's in a panic right now in an attempt to try to put Pandora back in the box, which is the methane. And although the geoengineering programs, which really go back to the late 40s, as you mentioned in the later 90s when they really ramped up, that's correct. But, I mean, this is something that was certainly seen on the horizon a long time ago. It was inevitable that given the impacts that we were causing, geoengineering being a primary factor. But now I believe, Jeff, they're in a panic, in a desperate attempt to try to keep whatever ice they can in the Arctic at any cost to the rest of the planet. And we see that because we see a conveyor in some senses. These high-pressure domes, you're not far from me, so you know this, the constant...
Sure. We didn't get... Did you get any rain in November to speak of? We didn't.
No. We haven't had significant rain since December of last year. And my exact location normally gets 70 inches a year. We're 190 inches short for the last 7 years. I mean, this is what happens when you aerosolize these incoming storms. It migrates the moisture onward. So massive high pressure over us, spins clockwise, jet stream goes over us, and this summer the typical pattern was they would pick up moisture from the Gulf, pump it up the eastern seaboard where there was a lot of rain, and they kept pushing that toward the Arctic where they were nucleating the hell out of it. We can see it on the radar when they're artificially chemically ice nucleating, which is a chemical process that turns rain at warmer temperatures to nucleated snow, heavy wet snow, but then that nucleation process cools the temperatures down, and that nucleation material continues to be active when it hits the ground. So we see, for example, last year here, we had temperatures in the 50s and 60s, and we still had 3-4 inches of ice on our ponds, and the process was so powerful, it was gassing the water right out of our ponds. We're waiting for more samples coming back on that now, but in the case of barium and ammonium, those two elements, and you can Google this and see lab tests online for this too, but those two elements combined can lower temps up to 100 degrees. So we know barium's in the mix. Ammonium is hard to test for because it gasses out quickly, but on the radar we can see they're nucleating almost everything, Jeff, because snow no longer has almost anything to do with elevation. It's based on regions because it's wherever they're choosing to spray the storm the heaviest, they can cause ice nucleation. So one side's snow of the storm, the other side's rain, sometimes at very warm temps.
Wow. Okay. They are continuing to push the envelope, of course, in terms of research and development, but as Dane is suggesting here, they may have pushed too fast, too far, and if it is out of the box and out of the bottle, it's going to be everywhere. How thick, how dangerous, I can't tell you that, but I can tell you it's going to be around for hundreds and maybe thousands of years. Dane, go ahead, please.
Well, this, on that point, with, certainly Fukushima is another global game-changing event with incredible ramifications, but this fallout from Fukushima is in effect being migrated more readily over us by this constant aerosolization of the moisture over the eastern Pacific. It keeps that material from raining out in the oceans, which is not great, but it's better than it raining out over us. So,
got it.
That's one more aspect where geoengineering is pounding the nails into our coffins. And as you correctly stated earlier, Jeff, they're geoengineering is much more than these horizon-to-horizon trails on an otherwise clear day. There is no natural weather at this point, and the majority of geoengineering takes place over the top of existing sprayed cloud cover or natural cover as it all blends together. And these artificially nucleated snowstorms, and this is something people really should investigate because it's hard for people to get their arms around this being possible. But the Chinese openly announced they were doing this. People should Google Chinese scientists create artificial snowstorm. They announced it openly until they did $1 billion worth of damage to Beijing, and they shut up after that. But now we see, again, we have the patents for this, one from NASA, and this appears to be a major mechanism by which they cool the atmosphere down at the cost of reducing precipitation. You cause an endothermic reaction, as these chemicals do. It tends to keep that precipitation from hitting the ground, but it does cool the air mass, the cloud cover. And we have periods now where moisture's moving in like right now. We can hear dozens of aircraft overhead. I mean, they never stop. The sound never goes away, and I live in the middle of nowhere. And you'll feel at certain points, it's like opening a refrigerator door, and you feel the cold air come down, and you'll feel these temperatures just drop precipitously. A couple examples of that. Denver was in the mid-60s today. It's supposed to be single-digit highs in the next day plus. So, I mean, these are massive temperature drops.
Right.
That's what we see now. It's become the norm as they push and pull the system, and they push and pull cool air here and there. And right now, with winter storm, it's Cleon. This is the third winter storm. First one was Atlas, second one was Boreas. This is the Weather Channel names these storms to make it more theatrical. They focus on the cold. They don't focus on the record warm anymore. And they're literally pushing a giant bubble of cold air south by a radically manipulated jet stream. Again, in 3 branches right now, which is quite unprecedented. They push this giant bubble of cold air south. So by Wednesday, you're supposed to have, the forecast is for rain and temperatures around the 50-degree mark at the Canadian border in the Great Lakes, while you have snow in Arizona. Now,
50 degrees on the border and snow in Arizona.
Correct.
Well, yeah, you just said something that really bothers me. There is no normal weather anymore.
There is no natural weather. None.
All gone. Now, when I was a kid, it was kind of like a biorhythm clock you felt in your body. You could tell. It started to rain. It's just Southern California. It started to rain in September almost every year. Rainstorms, end of September. And through the winter, we knew what to expect, spring, and it's gone. There's nothing. All bets are off. All bets are off. That's all I can tell you.
That's correct. That's why, you had, in fact, in early October, this artificially nucleated storm in South Dakota, which, again, I encourage people to look at the map we have on that, because Weather Channel has since changed all their graphics so that they're not quite so glaring and obvious. But we do have the maps in an article called Engineered Snowstorms Begin Again, where you can see it's snowing in South Dakota, a snowstorm that killed tens of thousands of cattle. This livestock that's used to this much harsher weather.
It caught those cows, so-called flat-footed, and just slaughtered them. I've never in my life heard of anything like that.
No, it hasn't happened before. And so you had the map that we posted in that article showed temperatures in surrounding areas like Minneapolis and Chicago, 85 degrees and rain, while it's snowing in South Dakota at 45 degrees.
So less than 500 miles away.
Yes. And the reason these cattle, again, if they're encased in a cocoon of this reactive snow, this endothermic reaction, even though it might be 40 degrees ambient temperature outside, if this chemically reacting material is against their skin, that temperature could be 50 degrees lower. And so, this is
how do they do it, Dane? Give us a little primer on how they artificially nucleate and make these storms happen.
What people assume ice freezes at 32 degrees as a given. That's only the natural norm. When you combine certain chemicals, you can radically alter that baseline.